If you're a practicing physician, you already have been told in some form that you're extremely intelligent, you're smart, you got into medical school, you passed your boards, you take care of human beings every day in a way that 99% of the population cannot do. So why is it that you're stuck? Why is it that a dermatologist down the street is pulling in 2 million plus, while you're maybe bringing in 300,000? And why is the influencer with no medical degree out earning you 10 to 1 on a content channel about your specialty? And why does every weekend feel like a recovery and every Monday feel like you're starting over? It's not because you're not smart enough, it's because medical school taught you medicine and pretended that it was the same as teaching you how to run a business when it was not. And the gap between the two of those educations is costing you conservatively between $3 and $10 million over your career, or depending on how big you scale and grow, perhaps that's every single year. I'm Dr. Isaac Jones. The next 15 minutes are about the gap, what's missing and how to close it without getting back for essentially another PhD or MD degree, and how to learn true business and how you can elevate yourself so that you can create more freedom, income, and impact. So let me lay out the numbers, because the numbers are what makes this episode urgent rather than just abstract. The class of 2025 graduate with an average medical education debt of $223,000 according to AAMC, including undergraduate loans. The typical figure is closer to around $246,000. Private school graduates average around $244,000, I believe, and some specialties combined undergrad plus medical school exit north of $400,000 in debt, which is what I ended up doing. Thank God I paid it off in around 4 years. So you spent 4 years in your undergrad, 4 years in medical school, 3 to 7 years in residency and fellowship. By the time you start earning an actual salary, you're 30 to maybe 35 years old, several $100,000 in debt, and you've spent 12 to 15 years being trained in clinical medicine. Here's what you were not taught. You were not taught how to price a service. You were not taught how to read a profit and loss statement for a medical practice. And you're not taught marketing. You're not taught how to build a team. You're not taught how to construct a financial moat for yourself and to create massive profit margins for yourself. You're not taught how to essentially acquire patients that actually works. And you're not taught how to evaluate partnership offers, a buyout, how to invest, how to make real estate decisions. You're not taught how to build content and distribute it or convert people that come in to work with you. You were essentially taught to be an extraordinary clinician, but you were not taught to be the owner of a business that performs clinical work. These are not the same educations, and the gap between them is the structural reason why surveys consistently show physicians reporting financial dissatisfaction at high rates despite earning incomes most Americans would consider remarkable. It's the reason 30 to 50% of Americans and physicians report a lot of burnout. And it's also the reason that the average physician, its effective hourly compensation after debt services, after tax, after malpractice, after CME investments, and the unpaid hours of charting and calls are far lower than the gross salary suggests. So you earned your way to the starting line. Then you discovered the race is being run on a track where you never trained on before, right? And you're in a system that is locked you down and you're not able to practice the way that you ultimately want to practice. So let's name what medical school does really well, because the criticisms have been very precise. Medical school really is amazing. It teaches you basic science with extraordinary depth, anatomy, biochemistry, physiology, pathophysiology, pharmacology, microbiology. By the end of the preclinical years, you have vocabulary and conceptual model of the human biology that most non-physicians literally cannot understand without a translator, right? Medical school teaches you clinical reasoning, the ability to take a history, perform an examination, generate a differential diagnosis, order appropriate testing, interpret that testing, and arrive at a diagnosis. And that is really a trained skill. It's not innate, it's not common, it's not transferable for most other professions, right? medical school, it teaches you to operate under stress. The 80 hours a week of residency, the night shifts, the holding, the pager kind of pressure that you get, the ICU codes, cognitive resilience that you need to have is unparalleled compared to other fields of practice. So medical schools, they teach you how to communicate with patients, but not very well, not always efficiently, but you essentially learn to deliver bad news, to negative consequences, to manage families, to hold the kind of intimate professional relationships, interpersonal relationships that most occupations never really approximate or learn how to do properly. And so these are the 4 pillars that are very real. They're valuable, they're table stakes for what you do. But here's where the criticism lands. Medical school then implicitly tells you that those 4 pillars that we just reviewed are sufficient, that if you're clinically competent, the rest will take care of itself. That if you're a good doctor with naturally a good connection with people, you're going to be a successful doctor. And the healthcare system will reward your competent hours, your sacrifice, the grinding, the hamster wheel, with prosperity proportional to your contribution, right? And the reality is that's a lie. It was probably true for one generation, but we know that insurance companies are cutting. There's all these insane things that are happening. The margins are getting smaller. Hospital systems are consolidating. Administration is being bloated. The clinically competent physician who relies on the system to reward them is now a labor input into the system. It's not optimized for your health and for your happiness. It's really you're a cog in a wheel of a system that is structured to enrich the people that own that system. And your clinical competency is extremely necessary, but it's not by itself sufficient in order to live the life that you want and the business that you want. And so I know I'm saying all the things that you already know, but the thing that makes the difference between physicians who thrive and physicians who tread water is the second education nobody told you you needed. There are 4 areas where the gap is the widest. If you go through each with what's missing, what it costs you and the specific consequences, it's important to do that. So blind spot number 1 is pricing. Medical school teaches you to bill, insurance billing, CPT codes, RVU calculations. It does not teach you how to price. Price is the discipline of figuring out what someone will pay for an outcome and structuring your offer to capture that value. Pricing is what allows a $10,000 longevity program to convert at a higher rate than a $500 visit. Pricing is what allows the dermatologist in a network to net $300,000 in a quarter and get paid cash. And the aesthetics and dermatologists will be able to net maybe $2 million a year doing the same procedure. So some physicians, they price their services by looking at what other physicians charge and adjust up or down by around 10%. That is not pricing. That's herd behavior. Real pricing requires understanding of what your patient is actually buying, what alternatives they have, what outcomes they associate with your service, and how to structure those tiers that anchor perception of value. The cost of this blind spot is enormous, and a clinician who learns to price effectively can typically increase their revenue by 50 to 200% on the same patient, literally without changing the underlying clinical work at all. And I think it's actually 10x in some cases as well. So over a career, that is several $1 million that are left on the table by physicians who never thought to question the pricing model they inherited. And the good news is you can get out of the system and learn all of these things to take control of your destiny, of your financial future. So blind spot number 2 is marketing. Medical school teaches you that advertising is somewhat beneath the profession. And many state medical boards used to actually actively prohibit marketing, and they would just let insurance and the systems of medicine do all of the referral work for you. But there's a demand for people like you that people need access to get help. Okay, so in 2026, the top ranked aging and longevity influencers by published rankings, including tech entrepreneurs who sold Braintree to PayPal, human biologists with no MD degree or anything like that, several physicians who built media platforms, and researchers whose podcasts reach more people in a week than most academic publications reach in a year. The list runs from Brian Johnson at the top, through Peter Attia and Gary Brecka, David Sinclair, Gabrielle Lyons, and others. What every operator on that list shares is audience. They built it, they earned it, they distribute content consistently for years until the audience compounded in the business assets are a lot more valuable than any single practice can be. Most physicians have an audience of zero. They depend on insurance referrals, hospital networks, word of mouth that really grows linearly. They're clinically excellent, financially mediocre, and largely invisible, right? They're not seen by people. The cost of this blind spot in 2026 is huge. And it's that the patients who would gladly pay for your expertise cannot even find you because you've not done the work to be findable. They're paying someone less qualified with a bigger audience instead, and than they would working with you and getting better results. So that gap closes only when physicians take marketing as serious as they took their clinical training. So blind spot number 3 is team. Medical schools teaches you to function within a team, do rounds, just stick with the hospital systems. Building a team is the discipline of identifying which roles in your business produce leverage, hiring the right people in those roles, setting up systems that let them operate without consistent supervision, compensating them in ways that align their incentives with their practice outcomes, and stepping back from the work that the team should be doing so the team can grow into doing something different, right? And so most physicians never make this transition. They're perpetually the bottleneck in their own practice. They handle clinical work, administrative work, marketing work, financial decisions, hiring, firing, and patient retention, especially functional medicine, integrative practices, etc. All doing that simultaneously. Their practice cannot scale beyond the limits of their personal energy, and then the personal energy that they give out, the practice ends up contracting because they just can't keep their head above water. So the cost is a physician who builds a team properly can run a practice 4 to 10 times the size of one who does not, while working fewer hours and making way more money. The compound effect over a career is what really separates the doctor who retires at 65 with millions of dollars in the bank and somebody that retires at 60 who's valued at, say, 20 million or 30 million. I have a client who's valued into the $50 million range and he's in his 60s, right? So blind spot number 4 is finance. Medical school does not teach you anything about money. Personal finance is omitted entirely. Practice finance is omitted entirely. Investing, real estate, tax planning, business structure, asset production, all omitted, right? The result is predictable. Physicians, despite their high income, are statistically overrepresented in personal financial trouble related to their earnings. They overpay in taxes because they don't know what structures are available to them. They invest in deals they don't understand because their colleagues said it was good. They sign contracts that benefit the employer because they don't know what to negotiate. They retire later with less than they actually should in the bank. The cost of these blind spots is the largest of the 4, right? Typically several $1 million over a career. When you compound the lost value of inadequate tax structuring, suboptimal investments, the lifetime costs of carrying medical school debt longer than necessary, it's terrible. Before we get to rebuilding it's worth being very clear about why this happens. Because this wasn't malicious. Medical school curricula are designed by clinicians and academics for the purpose of producing clinicians and academics. The accrediting body, that LCME for allopathic medicine, the COCA for osteopathic, set requirements oriented around clinical competency. So the board examines those structures, rewards clinical mastery, and the residency matches essentially the prioritizations of the clinical readiness. The whole system, top to bottom, optimizes for one outcome: clinical competency and a physician that can practice safe medicine. And so that's a defensible mission. But medicine is hard. Patient safety matters. The 4-year curriculum is already overstuffed with biochemistry, pathology, pharmacology, clinical clerkship, etc. The argument inside academic medicine has consistently been there isn't time for business education, and besides that, that's what medical school ultimately is for. The assumption behind that argument is that physicians would graduate into a healthcare system that would compensate them well regardless of their business literacy. That assumptions were essentially true for the generation of physicians who graduated between 1960 and 1990. It's been false for every single cohort since. So you end up holding a $250,000 debt and clinical credentials in a system designed to commoditize your clinical credential, right? With no training in any of the levers that would let you escape that commoditization. So this is not your fault. It's the unintended consequence of an institutional system that essentially calcified around a model of medicine that no longer reflects how medicine is paid for, right? And the system has no adjustments, and it hasn't adjusted since. And it will not adjust, which means we need to rebuild you as a clinician. We need to help you understand what to do from a financial perspective, which is what we have done very successfully. So this is the practical part. You do not need another degree. You do not need an MBA. Most MBA programs are particularly unuseful for specific operating problems of physician-owned practices. What you need is targeted education in each of the 4 blind spots delivered fast enough that you can apply it inside the next 12 months. So for pricing and offer structure, the discipline you want to learn is direct response copywriting and offer architecture. The foundational texts of Robert Cialdini's influence, the work of Eugene Schwartz, Gary Halbert in classic copywriting, and contemporary operators like Alex Hormozi, who has written publicly available materials on offer construction, things of that nature. 2 to 3 books properly internalized will give you a good framework for pricing your service that most physicians never really develop. For marketing and audience building, the skills you want are content production, platform-specific distribution, and the basics of paid acquisition. So practical resources are Russell Brunson's writing on funnels, the work on distribution-focused practitioners like Cody Sanchez and Justin Welsh, and platform-specific education from operators who built audiences in healthcare specifically. And the fastest path, you can pick one platform, is YouTube, LinkedIn, or Instagram, and commit to producing 1 piece of content per week or per day, depending on how fast you want to get stuff out there, for 12 months. That single discipline will produce more growth than any course you could buy. Now, I don't recommend doing all this stuff at once. Just pick one thing and move forward on it. For team building, the text that moved the needle is Michael Gerber's E-Myth, E-Myth Physician, written specifically for medical practices. Traction is a great book by Gino Wickman on operating systems. Patrick Lencioni's books on team dynamics are really good. The discipline is hiring slow, firing quickly, and writing down the standard operating procedures for every role in your practice so the team can run without you in your room, okay? And then for finance, for physicians specifically, the White Coat Investor blog and book is really good. The Physician's Guide for Personal Finance by James Dable And the tax-free wealth from Tom Wheelwright on tax structure is really good. For practice finance, the basics of profit first accounting from Mike McCloswick is really good. And the operating financial discipline taught in the book Profit First and Financial Intelligence is really good. The practical implementation plan as well. So pick one blind spot, read 2 foundational books on it, implement what you learned in your practice within 60 days, measure the impact, move to the next blind spot 12 months from now with disciplined implementation. You will know more about operational realities of running a practice than 90% of your peers. The last thing I would say is get a coach. Find somebody that can hold you accountable to the business growth that exists for you, which is what we do at Health Experts Alliance. You can check out healthexpertsalliance.com. So this is not a 5-year project, it's a 12-month rebuild, and the marginal hour spent on this education has a higher ROI than any clinical CME you could ever take, because it compounds every single dollar that you invest into this. It compounds in your practice. Nobody is coming to fix this for you. The medical school is not going to add, meaningful business curriculum. They don't have time, and the institutional investments don't reward it. The hospital systems that employ most physicians are not going to teach you how to escape their employment model. The professional societies will continue to focus on clinical excellence and political advocacy, both of which matter, neither of which closes your business education gap. So the one person who is going to close the business education gap is you. And the only time available to you is the evenings, the weekends, small windows that you can carve out from your clinical schedule that was structured to consume all of this information in the available bandwidth that you have. The cost of not closing the gap is the cost that most physicians end up paying without ever calculating it. Lower earnings, higher hours, being on the hamster wheel, burned out in their late 40s, 50s, and 60s, retirement deferred by a decade, and that's really what's happening for most physicians now. There's a slow erosion of the autonomy that drew most of us into medicine in the first place, and you multiply that across, a 30 to 40 year career, that cost is conservatively 3 to 10 million in lifetime earnings, and quality of life that diverges from your inability to get this information it drops, right? The cost of closing the gap is 12 months of disciplined evening readings and weekend implementation, plus willingness to accept that medical school left you with practical education, even though it took itself extremely seriously and charged you $250,000 for the privilege. You're a clinician. You have proven that you can master a complex domain under pressure, and you've already done hard things. The business education, frankly, is easier than what you've already survived. The only thing you have to overcome is the implicit message you were given during your training that this work was beneath you, that someone else would handle it, that clinical excellence was enough. It was never enough. It's increasingly less enough every single year, and the physicians who internalize that fact this year are the ones whose practices, careers, and lives look fundamentally different 10 years from now. So drop a comment with what your blind spot is of the 4 and what book you're going to pick up first, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thanks so much.